Morning, BookTube. Today is Tuesday, at least here in Thailand. Not sure what time it is and day it is where you are. And I just learned that we do tags on Tuesdays on BookTube. Oops. Well, I'm still learning. What can I tell you? I'm sure I'll be forgiven for having done book tags on whatever days I've done them. Today I'm going to do the book snobbery tag combined with the in your pants tag, just to make it fun. And I am aware of at least three iterations of the snobbery tags. There was recoveries of, there were, looking back through, many snob tags through the BookTube years. But this is the one everyone's doing right now, book snobbery. I have it from really random reads whose answers I really enjoyed. The first question is to define snobbery. Well, the first thing I would say is that one looking at my channel would probably assume that I am the epitome of, or the epitome of book snobbery. But I think that one reading my, or listening, I guess, to my channel would think, oh, this is a really interesting question. Is this guy a snob or not? Look, my academic discipline was literary criticism, so I should be a book snob, right? I think what saved me from snobbery in my personal case was being a writer, and especially the type of writer who's not primarily a stylist, but a storyteller. I think being more in the story than in the literature camp, I think that maybe helped a little bit. But anyway, I'm sure I've had my snobby moments through life, like all of us had, although few of you will admit to it on BookTube. Whatever your particular snobbery is, right? We've all got our own. So how would I define snobbery? I'll just say this as a last insight into that. There are snobberies to every genre. Whatever your genre is, you can be a snob in it. There can be what did they say? No one hates Star Wars like people who love Star Wars. There can be a high fantasy snob. There can be a romantasy snob. There can be a hard science fiction snob. There can be a name a genre. Erotica snob. I guess we'll get to that in a minute. Okay, so my insight into this occurred when I was, oh goodness, just out of my hippie years, where I sort of used to look like a hippie. And not probably in the ways you're picturing, but anyway, I didn't look mainstream like I think I do now. And primarily because I was teaching, and I was just back in the States from Peace Corps, so I was trying to look, all American. And I met a bunch of my buddies' friends, this group of punk rockers that were all living together. And I actually have a lot. I do not like their music, but other than that, I have a lot in common with their philosophy. But they would never know it because they looked at me as just this straight guy. And, they definitely looked down on me. So there you go. They're lost. So snobbery of every form exists. Book snobbery, yes, while it can definitely take the form of, I only read, high literature, whatever that is. I insist can come in every genre. All right, moving on. So the genre, never would I read. Never would I read. Again, these are just, not that I look down on horror. Horror, well done, I'm sure is wonderful. Problem is, when horror is well done, it makes you feel horrible, and I don't like to feel horrible, so I don't read horror. I'm sure there are lots of genres. Some of you like, there's no genre I wouldn't read. It's like the people listen to every kind of music, but do they really? Let's look at their Spotify. I wouldn't read certain. I wouldn't read certain romance novels, but I'll get to that in a minute as well. Okay, is erotica, and I'll get to it right now, is erotica, comics, etc., fiction? or the comics one comes later. Sorry, they separated those. Yes, so I grew up reading a lot of romance in a certain era of my life when I was coming into manhood. Because I lived in my auntie's trailer room in her trailer, and she loved romance novels. So here's what I would say about romance novels. So, and by that I mean, I think you Brits might call them Mills Boons, or in the States it's called the Harlequin romances, by which I mean the very, very formulaic ones. And I'm not picking on romance novels. Hardy books are boys' books that also have style guides. So the sorts of writing that have style guides, right? The company tells you if you're going to write a book for us, it needs to have this and that, not have this and that. Sort of genre writ large, right? It makes for a more formulaic book. Now, I suppose that's what a Harlequin or Boons and whatever reader goes to those books for, a reassuring sort of story that you kind of know where it's going to take you and you're going to be satisfied. And what's wrong with that? Nothing at all. It's not for me just because I tend to get quite bored quite easily, and therefore I seek the exact opposite kind of literature. But there's no right or wrong in either one. So I would say I wouldn't read those more formulaic things, but there's no reason not to. All right. Classics versus bestsellers. All right, on this is the answer where I might lose some of you. Yes, I will make a defense of classics. Um, you know, popular literature, and I bet those of you who say you love popular literature also probably wouldn't read half of the things that are bestsellers. As long as our economy is driven by disposable income with teenagers, I would say it's the top 10 sellers, no, top 50 sellers is not going to interest me very much. No, often when I do look at the books that are selling the most, just as when I look at the YouTube videos that are the most viewed on earth, not the music videos, or the little kids videos. Yes, I do sometimes despair, only in my own personal alienation, that is just so far from who I am. I'll make the age-old argument of the classics having been vetted by time, blah, blah, blah. Of course, they were the popular books of their time. Of course, many of the popular books of those times have faded away, and many of those that are being read today will also fade away. I'll tell you another genre I don't care for. So I sometimes wherever I'm living have to come up with whatever English titles I can find to read. And there was a time when I was in Korea, and the only books I could find were business books. So of the type, I mean, like I'm a CEO. I inherited $1 million, so obviously I'm brilliant at making money. The people who never had to make money, and so here's how. Let me tell you my secrets because I'm interested in all of you being rich too. No, you're not. So I read tons of these books, and I have to say they are horrible and poorly written, and the emperor has no clothes. There, I've said it. I don't like them, and I look down on them. I'm sure I could think of other genres as well. Ever bragged about classics I hadn't read? No. I am very impressed by people who say they don't know something, and even more so when they say, oh, "What's that about?" And then sort of the next time you see them, they've got a book about that in their hand, and they've gone to find out all about it. It's one of the things that made me fall in love with my ex-wife. Yeah, I haven't read, Gravity's Rainbow. I haven't read tons of things, and I won't pretend that I have. It's silly. There's no point to it. Now, sometimes I've read things. I'm not sure anymore whether I've read things in excerpts or abridgments or, after, 30, 40 years, you start to be like, oh, how did I read that? You can't quite remember reading the original. So that could happen, I guess. Is audiobook reading. Audiobook is how we originally wanted to have our stories, right, told to us. Audiobook has the advantage of that immediacy, and certain things I would really enjoy having by audiobook. Reading has the advantage of giving you time to mull it over and picture it in your own mind and proceed at your own pace. So I think both things have their own their own advantages. Comics, um, nothing really more to add. Also wonderful, has the advantage of adding an artistic element as well, maybe cutting up the text in some interesting ways. I haven't seen a ton done super well, only because again, I would say the as long as it remains trapped in the sort of superhero genre, it's a little formulaic for me. Um, I will say that the emerging new stuff is a lot of it is very memoirish, very sort of navel gazing, which again I can get tired of pretty quick. But I've seen some great examples. I think it was Paul Auster's City of, that was a really good one, which is sort of a detective fiction where the mystery's trying to solve his language, and the visuals, the way they did that, really obtuse, otiose, you know, text. The way they interpreted it, I thought was like a paragon of what the field could be, and I hope it will be. What else? Um, I read some. One of the videos I watched for this said, looking down on these genres, I read all the Harry Potters. Ah, there you go. Those of you who think I'm a snob, um, said that that good and evil is too obvious. There's no good Slytherins. Well, actually, yes, it is quite obvious to me that Snape um, was a false friend. What do they call them? But yeah, he that's not quite true. He didn't read his Harry Potter. Okay, do I look down on any genre, self-help, etc.? Some self-help, depending on the self-help, I would say, as with each of these things. But no, for the most part, that's great. Improve yourself however you can. I personally would turn to, the Tao Te Ching or something before I would turn to, I don't know, um, how to dominate people, or I don't know what. Yeah, let's say they're reading The Pickup Artist. I'm not going to pretend I can't judge that. I definitely do. That's not the sort of self-help that I would wish for people. Okay. Have I ever been the recipient of snobbery? I was the recipient of severe beatings constantly for a decade growing up for loving books. So quite the opposite. And therefore, if I am a snob, I feel I've earned it. Would I be friends with snobs? Look, I just told you from the get-go that my academic field was literary criticism, so you can well imagine that I have been friends with lots of book snobs. I'll tell you this, they're fascinating. They've got all kinds of really interesting readings of things. So I recommend that you befriend them. Maybe you can enlighten them and soften their hearts about other things. Less sophisticated. As a person less sophisticated hasn't read, I would say the more widely you've read, perhaps there's a certain, depending on your definition of sophistication, of course, all of this is sophistry. But I'm not going to dodge the question like so many did. I'll put it this way, it's two things. One, I would say that reading classics, for example, is a royal road to being a well-read person. I'm going to say that instead of sophisticated. Some people think they're sophisticated because they're rich, right? Even though they're gaudy and, have unearned privilege and look down on everybody else. If that's your definition of sophisticated, no. To be well-read, I think is laudable. And I would say what matters more a little bit is the why than the what, or the how than the what. So let's say I'm sat next to someone on a plane and they are reading Paris Hilton by myself or something like that, right? Yeah, I'd probably be like, I don't know if we'll have a great conversation on this flight. Not that anybody talks to anybody on flights anymore. But now imagine that person is a literary scholar, and their whole reading of it is as background for the dangers of celebrity culture. Which, if you're not convinced of that, that's a whole other video. Um, you can make an intelligent and interesting reading of all sorts of things. Now, I would argue that certain books invite, they have more meat on the bone, right? They invite a bit more of that, at least for me. But to someone whose meat on the bone is romantasy, they're going to have a lot more to talk about with their friends about that than I would, just because I'm not a huge, as big a fan of certain romance. So I'm the one missing out on that conversation. So how much of a snob do I consider myself? Um, Less than you think so, and more than I think so. Let me know what you think. Okay, so to sort of end this as a maybe, to excuse myself of whatever snobberies I might have, I've decided to end this with the in my pants tag. A little bit dangerous for a gentleman of my age. So I'm going to invoke the veil of ignorance, the original position. There's a political philosopher named John Rawls, and he has fascinating thought experience where he asks experiment where he asks people to imagine a society, some rules for a society, but in which you do not know your race, education level of ability, language status, social status, anything, right? Gender, right? So I'm going to invoke that. So forget I'm an old guy, and let's just have fun with this as if we were, in fourth grade. So we're going to do the in my pants, which is where you take the titles of books and then you add in my pants, kind of like the fortune cookie one. What was that one? So the reason I could play this is I just went to the Bangkok Book Fair, yay! So for once I have quite a bit of books to hand. So let's start with The Affair in My Pants, C.P. Snow. Then I've got The Girls of Slender Means in My Pants, Muriel Spark, another one I got yesterday. Blue Shoes and Happiness in My Pants. That's an Alexander McCall Smith, which you've not read his mystery series from, I want to say Botswana, or Zimbabwe? Botswana, I think. Those are good fun. #1 ladies detective agency. The Eagles of Prophecy in My Pants. Don't know about that one. That one's a bit of a risk. I picked that one. This is a disappointing book, but anyway, great title for this. The Electric Jungle in My Pants. Unbelievable. I half read this long ago, so I wanted to get it to read the ending. It's really good, and it's perfect for this, but I didn't pick it with this in mind because I only thought of this prompt this morning. It's the War of Don Emanuel's Nether Parts in My Pants. By Louis de Bernier. One of my 3 Thai learning books. Thai in a Nutshell in My Pants. Got The Secret Museum in My Pants. Ooh, I'm going to do a fun video on this one. By the way, I've got a video coming up on the Midnight Library in My Pants, which I think is going to give a better answer about the whole book snobbery thing than any of these prompts did. So look for that. The first book I've read that was not picked for me by BookTube, but suggested to me by BookTube, by those of you who loved it and those of you who hated it. So check out my views on that in an upcoming video. Here we have We Need New Names in My Pants. I'm very excited about this book. You're going to get a video on that one probably as well. Notes on Grief in My Pants. The Chimananda that I already did a video on. Gonna maybe do one on this one. It's, the King Mongkut and the British. No, better not do that one in Thailand because that would be less majesty. So I won't do that one. Here we go. The Dragon Reborn in My Pants. I haven't read these 2 fat books yet, but I'm going to talk to you about, I'm going to do another video on the last book snobbery thing that I want to talk about. So the amount of things that people are reading with these stacks. And we've got The War at the End of the World in My Pants. That was the other one I did with that one. And finally, last but not least, so far I can't get into this book, so I'm not promising any videos on it. The Angel of Repose in My Pants. Thank you, book snobs. I mean BookTubes friends. Bye-bye.